We're very excited to be joined today by a very independent thinker, journalist, and commentator, Tim Pool. Great to see you, Tim.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, Tim.
So there seems to be a lot of confusion about what you're all about, what your ideology is. As they said of Tulsi Gabbard, what exactly is Tim Pool up to, right? So just tell the audience just a little bit about you and how you came to hold some of the views that you have.
I'm from the south side of Chicago. I grew up in a relatively poor area, gang territory. Chicago's very, liberal. So that's what I grew up around. My family was very active with LGBT rights, when I was younger. So I was surrounded by all of this. I was very much, growing up, I was a skateboarding punk rock anarchist, very far left, very angry. And I had a few, formative moments, I should say, where I met some religious people, some conservatives. I should add as well, I was from kindergarten to fifth grade, I went to Catholic school. Very quickly became angry and dejected and rejected this, went to public school. Mm-hmm. But then later on, when I met some conservatives and started trying to figure out why they thought what they thought, it was actually a very far left individual who told me good things about Christianity that I had not heard before, and surprised me because I didn't understand why someone who was supposed to be like me was defending religion. And he basically said, the story of Jesus is a person who wanted to bring people together, and he was very cool. And I wish that's what we could do, even though I'm not religious. And so that inspired me. And then I started listening, and it kind of made me realize, we're all people. We all see the world in certain ways, and we have to work together so that we can survive and be comfortable, and violence and hate and racism and all that stuff. That includes reaching a hand out to people you completely disagree with, sitting them down and having that conversation. And this actually pulled me a bit away from the more further left policies towards a more, I don't necessarily want to say centrist, but I was definitely closer to the center, after that.
Mm-hmm. So, Tim, we really came to national prominence after the debate on Joe Rogan's show with Twitter, with Jack Dorsey, and then the head of Twitter safety and standards. And you barely become a prominent warrior for free speech online. Why is that such an animating force for you?
I don't know. When I grew up, it was always the left that defended free speech. It was the left that pushed back on overbearing corporate power and monopolistic power. And I've never given up on that. I'm not into tribes. I'm not here to win. I'm here to talk about what I believe is right. So a good example of how I ended up on the Joe Rogan podcast is simply that for the past few years, I've been reading mainstream news, starting with Gizmodo, when they reported that Facebook routinely suppressed conservative news. That's a Gizmodo report. That's not some conservative website. Mm-hmm. But for some reason, when I would start talking about this, saying, hey, this is really bad, this is going to start affecting us, we need to defend everybody, even the conservatives, a bunch of outlets started calling it a conspiracy theory, saying there was no evidence it was happening, but it was Gizmodo that broke the story. So I've been very actively tracking the bias against conservatives. And I'll admit, right, the conversation is broader than conservatives. A good example is Project Veritas released information from Pinterest, and they focused heavily on this pro-life organization, Live Action. But what they didn't mention, probably because, they have their own biases, that's okay, is that anti-media was also banned by Pinterest, and they're a leftist anti-war organization. So for me, I look at it like a massive multinational billion-dollar corporation with unelected individuals deciding what Americans can and can't talk about is very dangerous. And lo and behold, now Tulsi Gabbard is suing Google because they suppress her advertising account. It's unfortunate that for some reason it's only the right defending free speech, even though it used to be the left. But we can now see the negative ramifications on leftist activists who have ignored this for too long.
Well, and I think that's the piece that's really important. I think it's a little too simplistic to say, like, Silicon Valley is liberal and they don't like conservatives. Silicon Valley is corporate, right? Silicon Valley is pro-capitalist. And as you have described before, they see as interest in their bottom line sort of supporting these liberal cultural values, although, as you're pointing out, other values, including sort of labor organizing or things like that, that would be pro-worker and also would be on the left, they'd be very much opposed to. So I think what gets missed here and what gets turned into a tribal battle is the fact that if you hold any views or positions or are advocating for anything that doesn't serve Facebook's bottom line, Twitter's bottom line, Google's bottom line, et cetera, then you're at risk. And look, these are human beings that own and control these companies. So I think to think that they have no bias is, number one, insane. And number two, I think it's insane to feel comfortable with someone like Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey or whoever it is holding that amount of power and having this godlike ability to say, yes, you can say that, no, you can't say that, this is acceptable, this isn't, this is good for me, this is bad for me. Look, if you have heterodox, anti-establishment, or radical views on the spectrum, that's something that should deeply, deeply concern you.
You know, it's funny. People don't seem to know what a centrist is. And you'll end up with articles accusing me of being a right-wing commentator whose political views are on the left. It's like, yes, have you considered that's what a centrist is? I think for me, the challenge is that most people see everything as either left or right. And while idealistically, I'm probably kind of far left, but realistically, like trying to actually accomplish policies that move us forward, I'm probably a moderate left. Mm-hmm. However, I think one of the big problems that's put me in this space, I've been physically attacked by Antifa, right? So naturally, I have my own bias. When I see these stories and I see Antifa and these protests, I'm going to look at that. I'm going to have my own emotional reaction to it, where I think it's, hey, this is really important. I've seen this. I've also worked for media companies that have talked about pushing politics to make money, and I've talked about that too. But those are things typically talked about on the right. Those aren't political positions. Saying that there's media bias or that a news organization is incentivized by profit and not by social justice isn't a political position, but it is something typically, conservatives will be talking about. So when people refer to me as right wing, I have basically no right wing positions, but I am concerned about some of the same things as conservatives on principle grounds. I think policy wise, I'm on the left. Politically, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, well, that's one thing. So this has been a really interesting debate here in Washington about the Zuckerberg speech he gave at Georgetown. He just testified before Congress yesterday. He talked about how he will not be fact-checking political ads. Now, to me, I actually think that's the right position, because we don't want Facebook to be the arbiter of truth on political ads. You can see how haywire that could go, but he's taking it on the chin for holding that position. What do you think, Tim?
So there's a viral moment right now where Ocasio-Cortez questioned Mark Zuckerberg for appointing the Daily Caller.
Yeah.
She accused the Daily Caller of being tied to white supremacy. I believe that is disingenuous. However, the actual organization Facebook uses is Check Your Fact. It is associated with the Daily Caller. But Mark Zuckerberg was correct. He did not appoint Check Your Fact. The Poynter Institute oversaw that. So if Ocasio-Cortez believes that Facebook should be fact-checking, then her own line of questioning in that video would not be allowed on Facebook because she was wrong. And that's why I think, no, don't give Mark Zuckerberg more power. I will admit, it's a rock and a hard place for Facebook. Do they allow viral hoaxes? It's really easy to make a fake news story go viral. But at the same time, if they're not going to fact check political stories, then you're going to get a contradiction. Then why will you fact check the average citizen, but let politicians get away with it?
Yeah.
In the end, I think Facebook should be hands off. I'm starting to think that these social media companies should get rid of the algorithmic feeds altogether, because that is a big part of where the bias comes from.
Mm-hmm. Look, I think the question of power is the really important one, because, again, just leaving the decisions up to somebody like Mark Zuckerberg, well-intentioned as he may be, he is a flawed human being, and for one person to have that much control is incredibly troubling. Tim, so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, please come back.
No problem.
All right.
Will do.
We'll see you then. We have more Rising for you right after this.